Yeah, I'm great, Angel. Thanks very much for inviting me and having me here today. These technical issues always happen when you least want them to happen, which is very typical. But we got here in the end, right? So it's all good.
Elliot, for those that don't know what you do and who you are, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So it's a good question. That is always a very open question, and you're never quite sure how deep or how far to go with it. But essentially, my name is Elliot Reeves. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Edinburgh in Scotland. I've lived here all my life, and it's a city that I love and I'm very passionate about. About a year or so ago, I started an online video show and podcast, which at the time was kind of loosely affiliated with London Real, which is, I suppose, how we met each other. I did that for a number of months while working in my job, if you like. I was working as an analyst at an asset management company. And then, I don't know, it just eventually decided that the thing that I was creating on the side, where I was putting all of my creative efforts and that felt like my passion, it increasingly became the thing that I wanted to pursue on a more full-time basis. So I made the decision in late October to quit my job and go, I suppose, all in on what I'm now doing. And I rebranded Edinburgh Real and now call it Inspired Edinburgh. And the mission, I suppose, is to inspire other people who are maybe in a similar position, who are doing things that they're not truly passionate about, to go and pursue their passion and reconnect with their purpose. And that's, I suppose, the overarching message, and something that I'm really keen to get across.
Elliot, from an analyst to video, or from first London Real, now Inspired Edinburgh, how you end up doing why video? How you end up doing videos is, I guess, is the question, because it's completely different.
yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, Brian Rose and London Real, I suppose, inspired me originally to get involved in doing that. And I think for a long time, I suppose I enjoyed my work, and I felt as though it was what I was meant to be doing, but I'm not sure that I was ever fully convinced. It's like your head tries to override your heart, and you try to convince yourself that you should be doing something, and you sort of live by that by that approach. But then when something else comes along, or when you try something else, and that's kind of the thing, it's about trying things, understanding yourself, and pursuing the things that you really, really enjoy. So when I originally started it, it was nothing more than a sort of, it was a hobby at best. It was just something that I felt as though it was a sort of shot in the dark, trying it out for fun. And it was just the more and more that I started doing it, the more and more that I began to enjoy it. And then I suppose got more and more into, I suppose, the technical side of things, and I suppose the art form of video, if you like. And that's kind of now taken over a little bit.
You hit on something really important there. You started doing it, but to start, you needed equipment. So let's talk about equipment. I know doing video interviews can be a little bit complicated. What's your setup like?
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. So when I started on this journey originally, I had an iPhone, which I think is most people's go-to device when they're wanting to start video. And I also went on to, it must have been Amazon at the time, and I bought myself a small, relatively cheap Panasonic camcorder. I think, in actual fact, if I remember correctly, I bought a Nikon DSLR. I think it was I think it's called a D5500. And that was about £600. Yeah, exactly. And I thought, it looks like a really nice, slick device. It was a red one, in actual fact. And, I hit the buy button on Amazon, And it was like, yeah, this item's being shipped. And it was only when I started doing a bit more research whilst it was actually in transit that I realized that all DSLRs have a time limit. You know, they could only record 29 minutes. And I'm thinking, well, if I want to record long form videos, then 29 minutes is never going to do me, unless I have somebody standing behind the thing pressing, you know, restart. So yeah, that kind of, you know, smashed those plans. And so I returned that and then bought myself a camcorder, and it's a red one as well. Actually, it's a Panasonic HCV 130, which, you know, you can buy them for like 130, 140 pounds. And so the first interview that I did was just with one iPhone and one camcorder. And we did it from, it was my dad's office, and the lighting was terrible. The sound equipment, I used a separate Olympus kind of recording device that I bought before. And yeah, and then when it came to the post production for that, I was using iMovie, and I had no idea. I'd never done anything on iMovie. I'd never done anything in film. I had zero experience of any of this whatsoever. So the learning curve was like absolutely, you know, vertical. It was really, really difficult.
You know, it's funny because a lot of people that I know, they get hung up on, I need to buy a really nice, expensive camera. I need to have all this set up before I take action. You took action before you actually, you know, had the really expensive and nice equipment. You had an iPhone and one camcorder. What is your setup today?
Okay, yeah. The setup today is a bit more extravagant. I mean, the camcorders fundamentally are the same, but I've now got, I think I've got 8 of the, it's either HCV 130 or 160. They're both virtually identical. They're very small, compact camcorders, but they produce a really, really nice image. And in an environment that's well lit, then, you know, you get a really nice picture. And people have since said to me they had thought that I was recording my interviews on, you know, proper big cinema style and professional devices. So that's good to hear. But along with that, I've also got a Panasonic HCV, I think it's a 230, which is that will record in 1080p, whereas the other ones I think record in 1080i. They still look good. And I also have, I've just bought another one in actual fact, Panasonic SD60s, which are slightly older model. I think they're 2010 models, but they produce a really, really nice crisp image. So I've got 2 of them as well. So I mean, I've got, yeah, like 10 odd devices. I've also bought myself a Canon 70D and a Canon G7X for more like vlogging or shorter form for a really nice image. But yeah, and it's, you know, very much in my personality that when I do something, I get like deeply involved in it and want to just research and explore it all the time and want to buy all the stuff. It's a bad habit.
You got to go, you know, it's good that you start and you go all in. Now, but going from 2 cameras and using iMovie, which in iMovie, yeah, 2 tracks and you can do that, and to 8 or 10, which I know I watched your last interview, and the angle, shifting the angle keeps the person attention going. It's very, very good. You can't use iMovie anymore. What are you using?
Yeah, so I think it was actually quickly after doing the first interview, I decided that I wanted something a bit more, you know, suited to the sort of professional. So I decided to get Final Cut Pro. I think I read an article that compared Premiere Pro to Final Cut Pro, and it seemed to suggest that the Final Cut Pro, essentially the time at which it renders and the time at which it did certain things, it was a little bit quicker. So I thought, okay, I'll go with that. And it's an easy enough purchase on my Mac to do. So I bought that. And I remember, like, when I first started trying to edit on it, it's like all these buttons and everything. It looks so intimidating, and you're like, Jesus, man, like, where do you even start with this? So I remember, like, honestly, I pretty much tried to get in touch with loads of people who were professional like video editors or film experts, and I was like, please, can you help me? I have no idea what I'm doing. And I have to be honest, like, nobody was all that forthcoming, or if they were, it was like they wanted to charge a fairly significant amount to help. I just wanted someone to give me the sort of basics. But yeah, unfortunately, that never happened. And I suppose that's probably the best thing in actual fact, is that by learning yourself, that's the best way to do it. You know, because if you make mistakes, you know how to correct them. And there's been things since that have gone quite wrong, you know, where there's like gaps in footage, or, you know, sort of myriad of things. And I've had to figure it out myself. And to be honest, nowadays, when you've got, you know, Udemy, where you can get courses in how to use programs, or you can just simply go on YouTube and find out. I mean, Google and YouTube have all the answers. It just takes time. It just takes time, and it takes effort, and nothing happens overnight. But yeah, Final Cut Pro is really, really good when it comes to multi-angle. I remember when I first started doing it, and I think I didn't buy like 8 cameras all at once. I just kind of added one. It was pretty much when I got paid at work, I would probably get another one. I got paid to get another one. So it's been a gradual accumulation of equipment. And when I was originally using Final Cut Pro, I'd probably have like 4, maybe 5 camera angles, and I had them all layered on top of each other, and I was slicing away bits, and it was taking ages until I eventually discovered like multi-angle editing. So it can read, it's able to somehow correlate or compute the audio waveform, and then it just essentially mashes them all into one, and then you just pick in real time the view that you want to look at, and it's so much easier. And I mean, the episodes still take me, because I'm a perfectionist and I like to get every single cut, you know, when it changes angle, I like to do it when it's going into a next sentence, or there's a gap in action, rather than just button bashing for the sake of it and changing angles. I tend to try and be quite strategic in my approach to it. Again, it's not because I have a expert knowledge or technical knowledge or anything. I just know what I like, and I'm quite particular. So yeah.
How long can you record with those camcorders?
Hours, yeah. I mean, like the longest live interview that I've done to date was probably in the sort of 2.5 hour region, I would think. But I've done some event filming as well, and they'll do into like the sort of 3-4 hours. They're great. You know, they're absolutely ideal for general use. As much as I desperately want to record everything in 4K and have it all slick, it's kind of impractical because of the file sizes and to be able to manage. So the setup that I have at the moment will probably do me for the time being.
What do you think is the most challenging part of what you do with the interviews, from beginning to end?
You know, every single part of it has its challenges. So I mean, I sometimes wonder whether people, and I'm not saying this is a kind of ego thing, but I sometimes wonder whether people understand the amount of time and effort that needs to go into the finished product. Because quite often, and even on television, you'll watch something and you're very often unaware or not that cognizant of how much work has gone into it. So I mean, in terms of end to end, there's the setting up of the room itself, and that involves, you know, the cameras, so getting all the camera angles looking good, lighting, audio equipment. There's then the actual research and the preparation for the guest. There is the interview itself, and then at the back end of the interview, obviously, there's then the uploading, you know, 9 or 10 SD cards worth of data, and then doing all of the editing. So I mean, I don't know that there's one part that's the back end. So the editing part is the most time consuming, but in some ways it's not that difficult, because once it's all uploaded, it's just a case of, you know, choosing your angles. So it's a difficult question to answer.
What you enjoy the most then?
Again, that's a really difficult question because there's elements of every part of it that I really enjoy. I suppose my natural answer would be that I enjoy speaking to the guests the most, because that's when you get to interact, live in person, and you get to, I suppose, dive deep into the mind of a kind of high performance person, if you like. But having said that, I do genuinely enjoy the editing part as well. There's something satisfying once you get the whole finished product and you can see it and it looks, and you're happy with the result. There's something really good about that.
Yeah. So here's another good question. I think, how you decide what questions you want to ask to your guests. Because when you interview, I was told that you avoid yes and no questions. And with time, I've practiced reading, train, how to perfect, and I've been collecting my own swipe file questions that I go and use. But for everybody's different. So I'm curious, what's your process? How you decide what question you want to ask?
Yeah, it's a great question. Okay, so there's a few things here. The first thing that I would comment on is probably the general structure of the interview. So very loosely, my interviews, I like to try and do a sort of past, present, and future. So I like to open by talking about the guest's background, sort of where they grew up, what they were like growing up, their sort of education and how I suppose their education maybe shaped them a little bit, and then going into their early career and moving on to what the things are that they're doing at the moment, and then discussing their plans for the future, their goals. And then, as I say, I like to go quite deep in a lot of the questions. So I really like to ask people questions around about, what is their purpose? What do they want their legacy to be? How do they define success? What they would change in the world if they could? And if they could speak to their 20-year-old self, what would they tell them? And I try and keep it structured as possible. You get some guests and you'll ask them a question and they'll go off at right angles and they'll go, so I'm quite a structured person by nature, so I quite like it just in sort of compartmentalized, whereas some people will just take the interview in another direction. You've kind of got to steer them. I did a job for a while. I did a job for 2.5 years, and it was working in what you would call a retention department. So in essence, people would phone up because they wanted to take money out of their savings or investments, and you would have a conversation with them to try and establish their needs and give them the best solutions. Now, what I learned from that was the art of open and closed questions. And that was absolutely, really a game changer. Whilst I have to say I didn't enjoy the job all that much at the time, it's been fantastic, experience and a basis for doing the interviews. So coming back, I suppose, full circle to your question about how to ask the questions, I try and avoid closed questions at all costs. So I'm always thinking, it comes now second nature. I don't even have to think, how can I avoid them saying yes or no? It's, tell me about, or, how did you, or what are your thoughts on, so it's just, I think a really, really good interviewer sets up the guest to be able to answer a question in as long form and as in whatever way they want. You're just essentially teeing them up, and then you're stepping back and getting out of the way so that you're allowing them to answer the question in full. And that then allows you to see the real depth of the person. And I think, and I suppose if I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, the one thing that I would criticize some interviews that I see is that the guest almost wants to be the star, or the guest has too much of a handle on what it is that the interviewer the interviewer has too much of a handle on what the guest is trying to do. And if they can remove themselves from that and allow the guest to express themselves and say what they want, then you get the best interviews.
But you hit something important. You said in your previous job, you learn and you practice that quite frequently, versus somebody that is starting out that might not have that exposure to learn to ask questions the right way, because it's an art. What would be the best? So this is a two-part question. What do you keep a list of? Do you have a swipe file of questions that you refer to refresh your memory, or do you keep reading about questions and how to ask questions? Because I think they're constantly evolving. There are always better ways to ask questions.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. There's you'll know the book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. There's one of the biggest lessons in that is speak in the interest of the other person. Now that for me has been, a massive kind of life lesson. And that's pretty much the approach that I take to everyday life. So if I'm interacting with anybody in general conversation, I'll always ask them questions about themselves rather than simply trying to project my model of the world onto them, because I'm interested in hearing what they have to say. That's how people interact. So yeah, I'm always trying to work on my questioning, and in almost every human interaction that I have, I just practice questioning. Like it's easy to do, right? If we spend time around people, we always have the opportunity to be asking questions. so that's what I would say to that. In terms of I don't do any studying of questions as such, but I tend to have a certain types of questions that I tend to like to ask in my kind of go-to questions. Having said that, I mean, when I think when I started doing interviews originally, it's a case of getting comfortable doing it and getting a bit of confidence doing it, because at the back of my mind I always had this irrational fear that what if I what if there's dead air? What if I can't think of anything to say? But it rarely actually happens. And so yeah, I suppose it's allowing yourself to dissolving your ego, for the want of a better phrase. Like people don't care. So if you can allow yourself to just be in the present and be in the moment and just allow the conversation to flow, then yeah, that's a good way to approach it.
I think you hit it in the point. I think being truly interested on the other person is very important right there. Not a lot of people today do that. I meet a lot of people that they're always trying to get something from you instead of giving, and I think you give. Now, you mentioned the book, How to Win Friends and Influence. What book do you think should be on everybody's bookshelf?
Gosh, that's a good question. Oh dear.
What was the last one you read that you liked?
That's a good question as well. I'm the sort of person, like Ty Lopez is funny because he says he reads a book a day. But when he says he reads a book a day, what he probably does is he reads little segments of books a day and he says he goes mining for nuggets. So that's economical with the truth. I'm quite like that. I have a tendency to kind of dip in and out of stuff that I read. So I won't necessarily sit down and read a book from cover to cover. I'll kind of go in and out of books and get bits and pieces from them. I mean, there's so many books, and this shouldn't be such a difficult question. How to Win Friends and Influence People is definitely a must for just being a good human. I did a recent interview, which hasn't yet been released, but it will be released, with two guys who do Voices in the Dark podcast, John Waterlow and Andrea Domenicini, and they're doing on their podcast, they are doing a kind of critical analysis of Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, which is another fantastic book. It's similar probably to How to Win Friends and Influence People, but it's a little bit more cutthroat. But that's a great book. Other books, man, this shouldn't really be that tough a question. You know, just like I'm just trying to think, like, what was the last thing I read? I might have to come back to that question.
No.
I think I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I probably listen to more audiobooks than I do these days than read. The last one I think that I was listening to was probably Grant Cardone's The 10X Rule, which is that's brilliant, especially in audiobook form. It's like a really strong kick up the backside to you know, up your standards.
I have it in audiobook as well. I haven't listened to it yet. I started, I'm more in audiobook as well, but lately I'm doing, I used to do your strategy on books, like reading bits and pieces that I needed, but now I'm committing myself to read. Once I grab the book, I am not going to start another one until I finish, except the, not only that, I'm actually committing myself to do what the book says. So I don't want to consume information just to consume information. The only one that I'm actually reading right now that, and I'm using more as a, you know, leaving the phone in the office, not taking it to the room and reading in the room, is the Tools of Titans from Tim Ferriss. I think that one is good. What you know now, you wish you knew when you started doing video interviews?
Good question. Probably stuff. This is probably a funny answer, but it would be probably around about setting up camera angles and lighting, because ultimately I think it's those things that will give the best aesthetic, you know, product. So I've played around with so many different lighting setups to try and get it looking right. And I always end up with people looking overexposed, or they've got different light, or there's so many. Now that I'm thinking about it, there's so many lessons that I wish I had known. I've recently mastered white balance on the cameras. Because when I had them set to auto white balance, sometimes if there would be a flicker in the picture or something, it would change the whole color grading, which made, you know, back end or post color grading a nightmare. So yeah, that would have been handy to know. I actually, there's a guy who I spoke to who is a professional video editor. And this was at the time when I tended to have interviews that would simply go from one person to the other person and then back to the other person. And he said, what you really need is actually a master view that captures the entire scene. And that has made a massive difference to the interviews. Being able to go to that as your like go-to scene that sets the entire picture. So yeah, I wish I knew that as well. There's probably a few things that I would say that I wish I had known, but again, it's like if you're not doing it, and if you're not making mistakes, and if you're not failing, then you're not learning. So it's all just part of the process. And it would be very easy for me to have gone to someone early on and said, oh, can you do this all for me, or can you help me with it? But you're not really going to learn as much doing it that way. So by doing it yourself and by making mistakes and hitting trip points, that's the way that you master stuff.
Now let's get to the serious, the juicy part, the secrets. I love secrets, Elliot. What are you doing to attract? How are you attracting guests? How you're putting yourself out there to attract more guests?
Yeah, good question. There's a few ways that I suppose I'm doing the whole sort of guest generation. One of the easiest things that I've done is, and I did this for a while, was just going onto LinkedIn and typing in words like entrepreneur, CEO, founder. Founder's a great one, because then you're finding people who are actually the creators of whatever it is that they're working in. So yeah, that's been really good. So yeah, Edinburgh CEO or founder or something like that. What other means? I mean, once you do an interview with one person, what I'll always do at the end of it is say, if there's anyone else that you think I should be interviewing, like, let me know. Or is there anybody that you know that you think would make a really good interview? And then from that, I'll often get 2 or 3 kind of referrals, if you like. The other thing that I've probably not done as much of this as I could have done or intend to do, but it's asking your audience, who do they want to see? That's a good way of doing it. I'm trying to think what else. I mean, just generally looking for people within your area that are of interest. And I suppose if there's somebody that you want to get to, and this, I don't mean this to sound as perhaps callous as it might, but ultimately it's like playing the sort of 6 degrees of separation. You know, if you can interview one person who can open a door to somebody else, to somebody else, to somebody else, then that's a way that you can kind of join the dots, if you like. Which isn't to undermine the people that you're interviewing in the short term, because everybody has their own value and everybody has their own experiences and life lessons and such. So yeah.
No, and that's a good way to see it. So what are you hoping to gain from interviewing people? What is your goal? What is that you actually? Yeah, what are you hoping to gain?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at anything with a view to gaining, you're probably in it for the wrong reasons. So I'm not in it for personal gain, is the honest truth. I'm in it because I love doing it. I love having conversations with people, and you know, if it's a good quality conversation with an interesting person, then by having a camera on and putting it out into the public domain, that's just a byproduct, if you like. I'm not entirely sure where the path is likely to take me. It's really about, I don't know if you're familiar with, it's Tony Robbins' 6 main elements of what's the terminology? It's like the 6 human needs. So it's certainty, uncertainty, love and connection, significance, growth and contribution. So if these 2, growth and contribution, if they're your drivers, you'll get the other ones. And that's kind of the way in which I try and live my life, is that if I can come at life from a place of growth and contribution, you'll get your happiness, you'll get your significance, you'll get love and connection, you'll get your certainty and uncertainty. And yeah, by not focusing on money or not focusing on trying to gain happiness, or not, as I say, it's less about me and more about the message and what it represents.
That's a good way to seeing it. For example, me asking you these questions answer a lot of questions. So you're teaching me. So you're teaching me yes, I can go and search and spend countless hours searching, probably like you did at the beginning, about cameras and what camera, not buying a D5500 and then realizing they only record 29 minutes and just going through that process. I've been thinking about buying a camcorder just for the fact that I would like to do a video in person and have a conversation for longer periods of time. However, right now, the only way that I've been able to do long interviews like that is with an iPhone. So you are, if I gain something, is that knowledge. So and I think for me it's great, and for other people that might be learning or are interested in doing something similar, it answers some question from somebody that is doing it, not somebody that you know how the internet is. I've done this, but people are not really doing what they claim to be doing. So right now I'm learning. I've been doing this for a long time. I have videos, but interviews mainly in the past. What I did was Skype and using Ecamm to split the call.
Mm-hmm.
But not the way that you're doing it. You're doing them in a way more professional setup. And once I moved back to the States at the end of this year, in the summer, and I started doing more, the local area, local businesses. So I'm going to have to reinvent myself. And if I'm gaining some knowledge, I'm going to use it for that. So that is, my line of questions, and obviously giving you exposure, and because your time is valuable. So it's not, I think you and I had the discussion before that about not promote, these interviews that they look like you're promoting the other person way too much. It's not, I don't think it should be about that, but unfortunately some cases are like that. But yeah, if I ask a question about what you're gaining from it, is, the line of questions that I pick for the most part is, or not for the most part, is I want to know. I truly want to know. I truly want to know.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's obviously, if there is a self-serving element of, interviewing people, it's probably, as you're saying, it's learning, it's assimilating the learnings and the experiences that they've had, and especially if they're people that they've been very successful. There's a huge amount of things that you can learn, but it's just, I find it really just interesting to hear other people's views on life, and yeah, just in a broad sense. And I just think that you can learn something from every single human interaction that you have. And if you're not doing that, you should probably start doing that. And I don't mean that to you, I mean that to anybody. You should always be learning, and you should always be trying to improve, and you should always be self-aware, and I suppose critiquing yourself, but not in a negative way, but just being, how can I do things better? What can I improve on? And just, constantly learning and improving.
Oh, definitely. Now, talking about learning and improving, last week I interviewed Moose Williams. He does photograph tutorials, and he shared how he created his YouTube. For example, he shared that he brainstorms on Monday, he records on Tuesday, and edits on Wednesday to publish on Thursday. Do you use a similar format, or what's your process?
I don't have a kind of rigorous process at the moment. So what I've done to date is I've recorded a series of interviews. So I now have probably a catalogue of about 8 or so that are kind of pending release. But what I'm doing is I'm putting them out each week usually on a Tuesday. I try and avoid setting really rigorous rules, because it gives me the freedom to then be able to kind of flex and kind of suit my life without being too pinned down. But yeah, I mean, my process is basically always to try and have 1 or 2 edited and ready to go out the next week. And there's a fair amount to it. So I mean, I'll upload the full interview to YouTube. So what I'll do is I'll edit the whole thing, right? So I've got this, hour-long interview, say, upload that to YouTube. I'll then create a small trailer using the whole thing. I'll just get little snippets and put them together in a nice little sort of trailer thing. I'll then upload that to YouTube. I'll then link the YouTube video to the website, so that it's kind of hosted on the website. and I'll try and do that a little bit in advance, and then I'll kind of type out a little bit about who the guest is. Now, in most circumstances, that's just the introduction that I had prepared for the interview that I did with them. So I'll type that out and I'll just read it verbatim when I open the interview. I can just use that then as the text for on the website. What I also do is when I make the little trailer, I upload that natively to Facebook, because that gets, it has much more, I think it's to do with Facebook algorithms and the way that Facebook now is, that they're very pro video. So by uploading it natively, you tend to get a lot more shares and a lot more potential for views than if you just linked a YouTube video. So that's what I've been doing. So I upload the trailer to Facebook, but in the comments, I will embed a link to the actual interview. But the actual interview is on the website, not YouTube, because I keep the YouTube full episode unlisted. Yeah. So that's kind of the process at the moment. And then it's just kind of sporadic Twitter and Instagram activity. I don't have set days for doing stuff like that. And even in terms of the management of my Facebook account out with the weekly episodes, it's just kind of ad hoc. It's not like, oh, it's like 5 o'clock on a Wednesday, I better be posting. I know that you've got a really good setup with buffer and scheduling and things like that, and that's probably stuff that I need to look at and get a bit more savvy with. But
I was answering, somebody jumped into the chat and I wanted to see if they had a question for you.
Okay.
But I do have a one for you. That sounds like a lot of tasks, a lot of steps to make sure everything goes according to plan. Do you use or have a checklist that you follow to make sure you check everything that you've been doing that is proven? Or, you know, that to make sure that you don't miss anything important?
I tend to be somebody that just makes a kind of a mind map in my head. So I just know the kind of processes from having done the steps. So I don't have anything kind of written down. It actually would probably benefit me to have something like that. But I tend to just have this kind of routine that I'll do that first, and then from there I'll do this, and then from there I'll do this. One thing I didn't mention was the fact that I upload the podcast, so the audio only, I upload that to Podbean, and that has the RSS feed that goes to iTunes. And it's also on Acast, and you can also get it on Overcast and a whole plethora of other platforms as well. So it's actually embed the audio portion as well on the website, but it just became a kind of fruitless task. Like, if people are going to the website to consume it, they're probably going there to watch it. And otherwise they can, you know, it's accessible enough from iTunes or any of the other platforms. So I was just chasing my tail by doing that. But no, I mean, I tend to just kind of stay on top of it and have a pretty good handle now, because I've done it for quite a while. I tend to just know the process and tend to just, yeah, do it step by step.
I ask because being in the military for 20 years, anything that is important, we use a checklist to make sure we don't miss a step. It's not necessarily to follow the steps, go from 1 to 2 to 3, but to make sure that when you finish the checklist, everything that is important has been done. And I kind of copied that into my business, and I create I have a checklist for, if I'm going to do a video and it needs to be transcribed, it needs to be promoted, and to make sure. And if I incorporate something into the steps, I can test after doing so many times if it's worth my time or if it's being effective or not. And for me, it's been working good. But I'm like you, I don't like to tie myself to a schedule. I want my freedom. I want to be flexible, and that's something that I look forward to. But here is another good question for you. You mentioned you are a few places where you are reusing the content and kind of promoting the content. But let me be more specific. What are you doing besides podcasts and that plethora of places, like, what is your promotion strategy? What are you doing to promote your interviews?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, Facebook for me at the moment is a really, really good place to build brand awareness. And by using the Facebook Ads Manager, it's really easy to just essentially have a kind of sponsored post for like a few pounds that lasts there for quite a while and will get thousands of views. And that's a really, really good way. I think I've spoken obviously to a lot of kind of very screwed on marketing people, and I think there's this belief that Twitter is kind of dying out a little bit, or that it's. I see you shaking your head. A lot of people seem to think that Twitter isn't the place to grow an audience. My Twitter strategy isn't by any means a good one. It tends to just be kind of spitting out content rather than using it to actually speak to people and engage with customers, which is probably what you should be doing on it. But that just feels like it's kind of time consuming. So yeah, LinkedIn's actually a good place to, again, raise awareness, because there's a lot of people that will be like open networkers. So it's easy to get eyes on your content doing that. But the problem is, I suppose it depends what your intention is. It depends if your intention is to just simply get eyes on what you're doing and raise awareness, or if you're ultimately looking to convert people into paying customers. Because, by just buying followers, that's not the solution to having a business. So yeah, I suppose I'm kind of in that that kind of middle ground at the moment. I'm still, I suppose, finding my feet as to what this is going to look like in a few years' time. But at the moment, I just want to kind of get stuff out there and try and raise awareness of Inspired Edinburgh and what it represents, and then just kind of take it from there. Everything starts somewhere, and that's kind of where I feel as though I am a little bit.
One last question.
Sure.
If you had to teach a class right now today, what would you teach?
Any class.
Any class.
Oh dear. Okay.
Obviously, something that makes you happy, something that well, everybody has a reason to teach it, but any class, any class.
Any class. Wow. Okay. Jeez. Yeah, I mean, it would. I think I would enjoy teaching people the whole, like, starting a podcast, from going essentially from the guy who had an iPhone and a camcorder to the 9 camera with full lighting and decent quality audio, with a website and having it on iTunes and all that stuff. I would probably teach that, cradle to grave. This is how you do it. These are the steps. And the thing is, it took me a while. Well, it's taken me basically a year to get from start to finish, whereas I reckon I could probably take somebody from on that journey in like 4 weeks. So yeah, it would be cool to teach somebody that. Actually, it'd be cool to teach someone that.
It sounds that you have a good class to teach. I will buy it. Just saying, I will buy it. It just, if you walk me through the steps. I have created iTunes podcasts before, but anything that can take me by the hand and show me behind the scenes, what are you doing, and I can learn from you. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I'm sure a lot of people are gonna be in. I would suggest, if you're not actively thinking about it, I would say create an outline and go from there and see what happens. Mm-hmm. Where can people find you?
Yeah. So the website is www. And it's kind of, I've amalgamated the two words, because I thought if you take the word inspired that finishes with an ED, and then you just add Edinburgh, it felt as though it would be too cluttered to have inspired and then Edinburgh with like ED. So I just shunted the two words together, so the E and the D are shared. So in inspiredinburgh.com. So there's there the same handle on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Those are the platforms that I tend to exist the most. There is, of course, iTunes, as we discussed. You can find that by searching Inspired Edinburgh. And yeah, I've recently actually set up a personal page I just did it on Wix. You know, my page is currently on Squarespace, although I intend to migrate it to WordPress longer term, as we've discussed. There's a bit more flexibility around that. But yeah, I do quite enjoy just kind of creating stuff, websites or whatever. So yeah, but I mean, if if anyone wants to get in touch, then feel more than happy to get feedback from people, or if people want advice, happy to. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, Elliot. I really appreciate you jumping into the call, and hopefully I get to see you again in person before I leave. I'm planning to leave in June, so I will drive to Edinburgh and see you. Thank you for your time and sharing, lessons learned and some of your knowledge here. And again, hope to see you soon.
You're welcome, Angel. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I've loved speaking to you. I hope there's been some kind of value in what we've been discussing, and I look forward to seeing you when that day comes.
Thank you, my friend. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Take care. Cheers.
Bye.